All right. So today I'm on with Bob Dusin, partner at HPWP Group. They focus on leadership development, organizational development, and in-house training solutions. So like I always do, I just let them tell a little background, let Bob introduce himself. He'll do better justice than I will for him. So.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks for having me on today. My name's Bob Dusin. Our group, the group I work with mostly is HPWP Group, and we work primarily with leaders and companies growing and developing leaders and growing and developing the company culture. Sue Bingham, my business partner, and I had a book published last summer. It's called Creating the High Performance Workplace, and in that book we give a broad overview of the culture that we advocate in a workplace, and the 8 elements that will create, if implemented, will create the highest performing culture that a company can have through engagement, communication, trust, everything from competitive wages, positive assumptions about people, getting rid of negative things in the workplace, all of the things that go to make an environment that's high performing and a place where people really want to come to work.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about like your backstory and where you came from and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, it was a long road. I was born and raised on a wheat and cattle farm in western Kansas, and went to school. I actually went to college and got a civil engineering degree. So for about 15 years, a little bit less, I was a project engineer and a project manager on construction sites, primarily high-rise construction. Then I went to work for a few different companies, and when I got a call from this company I'd been working for to come back and get involved with their training department, then a couple years after that, so I did. A couple of years after that, the HR vice president retired, so I took over that. So for 9 years, I was the human resources and training director for a construction company, which was kind of 180 degrees from being a project engineer and a project manager, civil engineer. So, I got a really good perspective kind of from both sides of the business, the operations side, and actually being out in the field and doing the work there, but then also what goes on on the people side of the business. And it's given me I feel a really well-rounded background. It's been 13 years ago now, I left the corporate world and joined up with Sue and some other colleagues at HPWP Group. And now we do leadership and culture development, coaching, consulting with companies across the country.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about that difference, right? Was it a rough patch transitioning from a process-based, project management-based into, now you have to actually deal with people and what's going on there and all that. So
yeah, a fellow project manager of mine told me one time years ago, he said, this managing would be really great if it wasn't for the people. And I kind of chuckle, but I think people think that a lot. Managing should be enjoyable and fun. And in traditional environments, we seem to let the people get us frustrated, and really it's makes a big difference on how we act and react with people. So yeah, there was a difference in dealing with construction crews and people in the field, and then going to more dealing with all of the things you deal with in HR, hiring and firing and benefits and compensation and all of that stuff. But it was an interesting shift for me, because I wouldn't say I got tired of project managing. I was just ready to try something different and move on. I'm not a do one person for an entire career type of person. So I loved the change of pace. And then I loved the change again when I went into business on my own. And that was a big shift, going into essentially having my own business. So the thing I saw when I shifted from essentially field to office was it gave me pause, and I stepped back and looked at why groups of people, teams of people on the job site or in the office, why some perform really well and some don't. why some seem to be pretty dysfunctional while others run pretty smoothly with better productivity and quality and safety and all of those things. And so that was really my drive to look at leadership more as I developed my career in the HR and training area. It really got me to thinking about why people and teams do the things they do and why they act like they do.
Let's hang out there for a minute and talk about that. Like, you mentioned why teams work together and don't work together. Part of what my audience and, what I talk about is this concept of being battle ready, and not only in your strategic plan and your marketing, but how to actually put it all together with your systems, infrastructure, and team. So like, what's the difference? I would love to learn from you and provide some value. Like, what makes a successful project or team, or where you were seeing those big difference?
Yeah, absolutely. And, in my days on job sites, I worked with a lot of different superintendents or foremen who ran the job, who actually were out there running the crews. And I spent either significant amount, if not full time, on a particular job. So I saw how different leaders led. And here's the big difference. And I saw this 30 years ago in a guy that I really still to this day look up to, and I feel he was ahead of his time. Construction's known as kind of a rough, tough business. There's a lot of screaming and hollering and orders being given and shouting and getting things done. And this guy, Ed, was the calmest construction foreman I'd ever worked with or seen. And he would talk to people in a normal voice. We refer to it as talking to him like an adult.
Yeah.
He would actually, if there was an issue, he'd ask them about it. He wouldn't scream at them about it. He wouldn't threaten them or punish them. He'd just say, "What's going on here? Explain this to me." And the thing about over time I realized was that all of Ed's jobs had the best productivities of any of our projects. All of his jobs generally were the safest, and they all came in on schedule. And he had very little turnover. People didn't want to leave his job. In fact, everybody, if there's an opening, I'd like to get on Ed's job. And Ed treated everybody with respect. He never talked down to anybody. In 5 years of working with him on various projects, I don't know that I heard him raise his voice to anyone. And yet he had these super high performing crews, and everybody wanted to be part of that crew. And so the difference I started seeing is that it's the leader who can develop that kind of atmosphere where when there's higher trust, there's lower risk. So people are willing to bring up ideas or problems or issues because they know there's not going to be any negative repercussions to that. And it creates that atmosphere where there's a lot of ideas flowing and back and forth. And so it raises the level of performance of everybody in the team.
Yeah.
And it all has to come from the leader. It all has to start with the leader.
Yeah. It's funny you talk about a foreman like that, because the first person I remember as a client of mine, a past client of mine, when I owned my gym, was like pretty much the first guy I started training. And he was a foreman, he was an electrician foreman, and he was very calm. You would talk to him and he would just kind of look at you and listen and do all that. And he was good to be around. He was enjoyable to be around. And, one thing I see is, people who start businesses are either afraid to lead or they go completely authoritarian, right?
Yeah.
They're completely like militant and all that stuff. And it's like, as you're talking about that, coming from this frame of like relating to the Army or relating to armed services, it's like those guys, they're all like have this camaraderie, right? Even though you call it militant, but after they get out of boot camp, it's probably, it's very,
right.
Like what you're talking about is you bring everybody to the same level no matter about rank,
Yeah. Yeah. And I've talked to people. It's interesting. I'm reading a book now called Team of Teams by Stanley McChrystal, who was a general in the Middle East, Afghanistan and Iraq. And Team of Teams, he talks about military is becoming essentially more cross-functional and looking for ideas from people. But I've also had military people in workshops and stuff that we do. And there is more of an authoritarian leadership style in the military, partly because that's what's needed at times. It can be life or death. We need to make a decision now. We don't always have time to stop and discuss everything, right?
It's kind of whiteboard, right?
Right. Hey, let's stop and talk this over a little bit when not everything's happening. It's kind of like an emergency medical team or firefighters. They have to make decisions now. They don't have the luxury of always discussing, but there is a time for that. There's a time when things aren't hot and heavy, that they do need to have that kind of leadership and that kind of teamwork within any organization, no matter whether it's military or any company that you have. So, you're right. Leaders seem, and one of the things I see that leaders feel they need to have this kind of authoritarian, especially a new entrepreneurial leader, is because there's still this feeling with a lot of leaders I work with, and especially what I call a traditional style of leadership. There are a lot of leaders who think if I don't look like I have control, people are going to walk all over me. I'm going to look wishy-washy. I'm going to look like I'm not in. I'm the leader. I'm supposed to be in control, right? And if I don't be this authoritarian figure, I'm not going to look like that. And there's a little bit of that fear. In fact, when you open yourself up more to the people that work with you, you'll actually be and appear to be and actually be a stronger leader.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of my biggest conflicts, because I was in a mastermind early on in my career for gyms, and the guy running the mastermind was very like that. Didn't want to look like, always had to be in control. And from my background, I went to probably one of the, as far as a football program, best high school programs, top 10 throughout the last 20, 30 years. And my understanding of leadership and saw how Coach Rawlinson led was amazing. I mean, he would come down on you if you were, trust me, I've had a few instances, but it was very, fun. And, it wasn't that like walking on eggshells, we knew what we were expected. So I ran into conflict like that because even my leadership style was, I want to empower people because they're going to give me more than I can get. Right. I'm only, if it's, creativity, if it's all these different elements, like my capacity is only a certain amount. And, so pulling them in to bring in, all those ideas and initiatives and stuff was that. And he used to it just was a big conflict. And I understand that it's hard as that person, to go back and forth. So, yeah.
And you got to kind of give that away. It's you kind of got to turn your people loose and have that trust that you can turn them loose to solve problems and make decisions. And you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, and you don't have to make every decision or know everything about everything. I've heard great leaders in the past. I remember years ago, Ronald Reagan was talking about how he said he's certainly not the smartest guy in the room, but he gets the smartest people around him. Yeah. And he would always praise the people that worked for him as knowing a lot more about whether it was, foreign policy or finance or whatever they were talking about. He praised the people that worked for him. And I've heard a lot of great leaders, political and otherwise, do that. They praise the people that work for him and acknowledge that you're there because you bring an expertise and ability to the table. And good leaders have to acknowledge people for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier you talked about a culture of high performance, and in this leadership, we talked about the actual leader and how he conducts himself. So what are some other high, big pieces that the listeners can take away to really understand, creating that culture of high performance?
Yeah, there's a lot of things, and I'll hit a couple of them right now. One of them is setting. Oftentimes, what I see in cultures or with leaders and companies that don't achieve their highest level, they're not starting out by setting the highest expectations. Leaders tend to set standard, mediocre, kind of average expectations of people, and people will rise to the level of expectations that you set. So we always advocate set high expectations, not unreasonably high where nobody's ever going to meet those. But we find that, and you've probably heard before, if you let people set their own goals, they'll oftentimes set them higher than the leader would set. And you've got to set those goals high, or people will simply achieve that baseline.
Okay.
So that's one thing you can do, is set high expectations. The other thing, and I think it's the first element we always talk about in our workshops, but we call it having positive assumptions about people. And that doesn't just mean thinking positive thoughts. It means assume that people want to do more. Assume people want to be challenged, that they want to solve problems, that they want to make decisions, and they want to see the company succeed. Because there was a guy named Douglas McGregor, a behavioral psychologist, 50, 60 years ago, came up with these theories, and leaders either look at people as they want to achieve and they want to do great things, or they tend to look at people, and this is why leaders become authoritarian. They look at people and see people who lack integrity, don't want to try very hard, even aren't very smart, don't want to make decisions. And when you think that about people, you're going to lead them that way. Just think about it, Anthony. If you have a person or people working for you, and you don't believe that they're maybe intelligent or smart enough to have any good ideas, are you ever going to go ask them for ideas? No. And if you don't ask them for ideas, and they might have some great ideas, are they ever going to come to you with those? No, because they're going to say, well, he doesn't ever seem to want to get ideas from me, so I'm not going to offer them. And that spiral continues to go downward. The more they don't engage with you, the less you engage with them, and it keeps going down and getting worse. And it's that way with a lot of different aspects of leadership. If we don't believe that our people are capable, that's the level they're going to perform to. Just kind of that minimum level of getting the job done, and that's it, and going home.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that, I encourage a part of helping out business owners is like their campaigns. And I even come down into leadership campaigns. So, these would be like cultural development, team building. What's some of your favorite ways to, outside of just being and, this day-to-day business, to actually develop that culture?
Well, there are a lot of things we have people do that they can see results with things. I'll give you one of them that I love. It's an exercise we do in our workshops. We have, a lot of times in our workshops, we have generally 24 people in a workshop. And a lot of times in our public workshops, they're from all different companies. Like we might have 10 or 12 companies represented in one workshop. So at one point during the week, we tell people to pair up with somebody else in the workshop that they don't really know very well or don't know at all. Not somebody from their same company or anything. And we have them go away for 20 or 30 minutes, and we want them to tell each other a significant story about something that really impacted their personal life, something that happened in their lifetime really had a major impact on them. So they spend 10 or 15 minutes telling each other this personal story. Then when they come back in the room, they tell their partner's story to the rest of the room.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's tears, they're very emotional stories, sometimes they're funny stories, but the group is kind of in awe when we're done with that exercise, in that feeling of how well they feel they now know that person. There's nothing like sharing things about who you are with your fellow employees. And I'm not saying leaders should go out and find out the most personal things about their employees, but most leaders don't even sit down and have 15-minute individual conversations with people to get to know them. That's one of the first things people can go out and start doing right away. Get to know your people. One of the things 20 years ago when I was in HR, and even before that when I was a project manager, I always heard that, as a leader, you want to keep that professional distance. You don't want to get too close to your people because you might show favoritism and all this. And that's just a bunch of, I mean, it's really the opposite. The better you know your people, the higher levels of trust you'll create, the more they'll want to come to you with ideas and solutions to problems and want to contribute more. But they won't do that if they feel there's any kind of distance between you, that they really don't know you well enough to have that sit down conversation, sometimes about maybe a tough issue to talk about. If they feel a distance or a disconnect with you, they're simply just not going to come talk to you about it.
Yeah.
And so one of the first things that you can have an impact at doing is getting to know your people by having more personal one-on-one conversations with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the ideas, I came up with was, this idea of, daily deposits into your actual staff. This is something I got from a personal development course, but
yeah.
What would it look like if your leader, your, part of your team, you text each one of you, 2 people on your staff every day, like, what's happening, how are you doing? What do you need help with? How can I support you? And I think just by that little habit, could increase your high performance or your staff's performance, exponential just by that.
Yeah.
So
absolutely right. And I think any kind of contact you can have, texting them or, just sharing things that happen, more than just coming in on Monday and say, well, what'd you do this weekend?
Yeah.
Get to really know who they are and what they like and how they feel about things within the company. And as a leader, don't be scared or don't be shy about hearing the bad stuff. Tell me, for a leader to sit down with an employee and say, tell me how I can be a better leader to you. In traditional environments, you don't hear that often enough. Tell me how I can better support you and be a better leader. And a lot of times they don't ask it because they think they may not want to hear the answer if the employee is being truthful, right? But that's how we get better. That's how we get better at what we do. And we can all do that.
Absolutely. And then just shut your mouth and take notes.
And listen, right?
Listen.
Right.
Give me a grade.
And don't make excuses. Don't,
Give me 3 to 5 things I can do better. Yeah. And people that are, leaders that aren't secure in who they are and they're in that authoritarian mindset, that's going to be hard for them to do.
It is hard for them. And again, it's a lot of different things, but sometimes it's about giving up control. Sometimes they simply, it's just they're uncomfortable with it. It's not in their kind of natural personality style. And they really have to push themselves out of their comfort zone to have those conversations. But if they really want to advance their leadership, that they need to be able to do that. Awesome.
So let's talk a little about your transition from corporate world into business ownership. Because
when I did, I was really enjoying what I was doing in the corporate world, but I had young kids coming along, so I wanted to find a way to spend more time with family, make my own hours more. But I really wanted to just kind of spread the message and work with different companies. Again, I've never had, other than this HR job I had for about 9 years. Before that, I wasn't moving from company to company, but having different jobs within a company. And I did work for a few other different companies too, but I do one thing for a while, and it's not even that I get bored with it, but I'm just ready to try something else. So this was really a new challenge. Yeah. And I had a guy at the time I'd done some consulting with, and he'd done some consulting for my company. So we worked together for a while, and he helped me kind of get my foot in the door in some companies to get started. And then within a few months after I started my own business, that's when I met one of my current business partners, Sue Bingham, who I co-wrote the book with last year. I met her and started doing work with HPWP Group. And so that's kind of how that evolved. And that's where it is today. We just love, like we're doing here, spreading the message and trying to help people and give information on how people can elevate the level of culture and engagement in their workplaces.
Absolutely. So like, who is your customer? Like who do you guys work with? Who are you guys looking to reach out to?
Yeah, it's funny. When at the time I joined up with HPWP Group, just because it was somewhat Sue's background, previous to me meeting up with her, and her husband, they had worked primarily with manufacturing type companies. But then we started working with, now our clients run the gamut. We work with major trucking companies, logistics companies, biofuel plants, call centers, retail stores, wholesalers, and manufacturing and construction. It's real, because what you'll find, and this isn't a surprise to you, we worked with a lot of manufacturing companies because we were familiar with that environment. And I was familiar with, for instance, the construction environment. And while there are a lot of nuances, people in construction will tell you that their problems are way different than everybody else's. But the fact is, at some level, leadership is leadership. And the things that we advocate, for instance, at HPWP, are true in whatever type of business you have. People want to know that they're valued. People want to be engaged in what's going on. You have to assume the positive about people. You have to build trust, better communication, whatever it is, competitive wages, setting high expectations. Those things are true no matter what industry or business that you're in. And so we work with the whole gamut of industries and businesses.
Awesome. And then your book, is there anything that, besides what we haven't talked about, what would be a great, what's included in your book and what you'd like to kind of share about your book a little bit?
Yeah, the book is really, it's a fairly broad overview of the 8 elements that create a high performance workplace. Again, those 8 elements real quickly are positive assumptions about people, assuming that people want to do great things. The second one is eliminating negatives. And what we mean by that, negatives in the workplace are those things that diminish the value that a person has to the company. So an example of a negative, one of the examples we use is, I like to talk about, is in a lot of companies, you'll have storage rooms and storage cabinets that are locked up. And you have to go to a manager or supervisor to get a key to unlock the storage room to get a pad of paper or something like that. And those things we consider to be negatives because they are sending the message to the employee that we don't trust you. At least there's some people here we don't trust because we feel we have to keep this locked up. So those kind of things are negatives. Even parking spots for higher level leaders and things like that means that you're somehow more valued. And really what it is you have a different job and different responsibilities, but the level of respect among everybody should be the same. Yeah. Then we have open two-way and what we call adult-to-adult communication I touched on earlier. And the way we describe that in a nutshell is we say to treat people like a neighbor that you like. We've all got neighbors. We've all had neighbors we probably didn't care for so much. But think about the neighbors you really like. Would you get into a big argument with them over something? No, you'd probably go talk to them about it, right? Yeah. You'd talk to them respectfully. So there's the communication element. There's engagement, building mutual trust, which happens when you do all of the other things. Competitive wages and benefits. Some companies have issues because they're not paying competitively. We don't believe that you should strive to pay the highest, but you certainly don't want to be in the lower range because you're not going to attract the good employees. But employees, if you've created an environment where people want to be, if they feel they're being paid competitively, they're good with that. They'll feel that that's fair. So just be competitive. You don't have to be the highest. You have to have stellar training initiatives and processes. And then the final element is to, as I mentioned earlier, set high expectations. Don't just make people's jobs a list of tasks that they have to do. And that's what a lot of job descriptions are. We have people write job descriptions in terms of really high expectations and written in terms of outcomes. Here's what we want you to do to have produced at the end of the day, not have you done these 17 things that are on your list.
Yeah.
So those 8 elements are what the book is about and it gives a broad overview.
Awesome. How can everybody find you?
We are online at hpwpgroup.com. And my email is just Bob at HPWP Group. I think it's Sue at HPWP Group. But yeah, go to hpwpgroup.com. It's got information there about what we do. It's our workshops, our workshop schedule, where you can get the book. It's got pretty much, it's got great podcasts like this that'll have links on there.
Yeah.
Articles we've written. Sue recently had an article published in the Harvard Business Review. So we've got all the links to our articles and things on there. So there's a lot of information there that we can provide to people who are looking to create a better workplace.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you on.
Thanks again for having me. It's been fun talking with you. And I wish the best of luck to you and all your listeners out there. And again, I don't charge for phone calls or emails. So if anybody ever has a question and needs anything answered or clarified or wants to talk about anything, I'm always open to doing that. And all of our information is at the website.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Anthony.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
All right, bye.